Good morning. My name is Greg Stafford. These are day texts where we meet together at 5 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, or whatever the equivalent would be where you are in the world, to consider a portion of the biblical record, verse groupings or day texts, as I call them, that pertain to a particular subject or that contain a certain amount of wisdom that we can benefit from, that we can use to help others, or that we can use to praise Jah. So we're working our way through the biblical books. At times we also consider non-biblical writings or history. But today we're working our way through the letter of 1 Timothy. If you want more about the letter of 1 Timothy, check the first video in this series labeled 1 Timothy, where I provide some additional information. Today we're just going to consider one verse. It's somewhat of a popular verse, mainly because of one of the textual variants in the verses. It's 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 16. And part of this verse in certain Bibles, like the King James Bible, it reads differently than in other, more modern translations. So I'm going to go ahead and read 1 Timothy 3:16. I'm going to talk about that textual variant, and then I'm going to highlight some of the other parts of the text that I think we can make use of. 1 Timothy 3:16 reads, "It is undeniable how great is the secret of God's way," or the secret of religion. This is my translation I'm reading from. "He who was made to appear in flesh, he who was pronounced righteous in spirit, he who was watched by angels, he who was proclaimed among non-Jews, he who was believed throughout the world, he who was taken up in glory." Okay, so this verse is very important. Before we get to the textual variant issue, it's very important because this verse essentially contains the great message. This is the great message. This is the secret of God's way. Everything is about Jesus. Remember, God promised the seed back in the Garden of Eden when rebellion broke out as the means by which he would reconcile humanity to himself. That seed has been God's secret, or the great message, ever since. And that's why you had various individuals like Moses, David, and others, Abraham even. You remember Jesus said, "Abraham rejoiced at the prospect of seeing my day," and he saw it and rejoiced. All of these people, back from ancient Mesopotamia forward, and before that, from the Garden of Eden, have been looking forward to the Messiah, the one who would restore the earth to the way it was. And it talks about the things he went through. He was made to appear in the flesh. John 1:14, the Word became flesh. He was pronounced righteous in spirit. 1 Corinthians 15:45, Jesus was raised a life-giving spirit. He was watched by the angels. He was proclaimed among non-Jews. He was believed throughout the world, taken up in glory. So these are the things in one verse that happened with Jesus. And if you can remember this one verse, 1 Timothy 3:16, it's a good way to present to others the great message because it summarizes everything that you can then tie to the seed foretold by Jah in the Garden of Eden, then to all the different messianic texts that come about thereafter, all the way up until Jesus' birth. At which time, as we know, as we read in our C.W. Jah talk show last week, Micah chapter 5 was quoted because it spoke about the one who would be born in Bethlehem. But that text in Micah was written before Jesus was born, as we have evidenced in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And that text talks about how Jesus' origins are from ancient times, not just from the time he was born in Bethlehem. And this is why David in Psalm 110:1 calls his son, the Messiah, his Lord, because he's more than just his son, which is exactly what Jesus told the Jews when he was debating with them about the Messiah. Okay, so now let's get to this textual variant here. All right, so I said this would be a good text to use to share with others, and it is, because it will capture for you the essential great message. But if you're reading this text with people who may, be using a King James version, then it's going to be a little different, because where it says "he who was made to appear in flesh," that word "he" in the King James it says God. Now, in the ancient Greek texts, they were written in all capitals, called uncials, usually without spacing, although some did have marks of punctuation at times. And so certain words were abbreviated, like God. So whereas you might have God spelled in the nominative sense as theta, epsilon, omicron, sigma, they would abbreviate them to just the first and last letter often. So you'd just have theta and sigma, the final sigma, usually with a line over the two, denoting a sacred abbreviation. Okay, so then you just have those two letters in that abbreviated form, the theta and the sigma. But the Greek word for he, hos, has a rough breathing and is spelled omicron sigma. So here you have omicron and sigma for who, that was later changed or accidentally corrected to theta sigma. Very similar. However, there's no first-hand uncial or capital Greek letter manuscript that contains the reading theta sigma, or God, earlier than the 8th or 9th century. All first-hand uncials, Codex Sinaiticus, Codex Alexandrinus, Codex D, all first-hand scribes of those manuscripts use hos, or I should say the Alexandrinus and Aleph use hos, who, whereas Codex D uses ha, the Greek word for the, which presupposes in some sense, like Metzger writes in his textual commentary, hos, because if they write ha, they're still using the omicron versus the theta for theos, or the abbreviated nomina sacra. Okay, so that's why we use Codex D as more in support of the reading hos, because it seems to be what it was indicating versus theos by its use of omicron, or just as a part of the reading hos that wasn't completed. Either way, Codex D is more in support of hos than it is theos. And there's no church writer, no early Christian church writer earlier than the 4th century who quotes the text with theos. So we have this transmission history with the biblical text at some point with just single words. We're talking about one word and one letter, basically. A one-letter difference in the abbreviated form of God and for hos that would make the change. But really, all of our early readings support hos, he, not God. So be prepared for that. If a person who uses the King James Version, which is based on the Textus Receptus, the King James Version is a good Bible in many respects, but it's old. It's Old English, it's based on older manuscripts, and it is not the most up-to-date translation. Sorry for King James people. You need to move a little bit forward in time and get a Bible that actually uses modern English and uses the best available manuscripts. Otherwise, you're going to have to keep explaining different readings like this, which really aren't that difficult. I mean, even if it said God was manifest in the flesh, I mean, we already accept that Jesus only came as God's representative. He says that over and over again. I come not of my own will, but to do the will of him that sent me. If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. I don't say anything of my own. I teach what I learned from the Father. You're not seeing another God or another spirit when you see Jesus. Well, you're seeing another spirit or manifest in the flesh, but you're not seeing another will. You're only seeing the will of Jah. You're only seeing the teachings of Jah. You are only seeing Jah in Jesus. He is Jesus. It's the same with any other angel who only does what Jah does. Jesus does it better and has done it better and to a further extent than any of those other angels, which is the whole point of Hebrews chapter 1, that those angels weren't brought into the world as God's firstborn in order to perform this act of worship to Jah, which is what it was. Jesus, as the exact copy of God's being, Hebrews 1:3, was brought into the world to do what no other angel had done, no other son of God had done. So he's different from them in that sense. and as the firstborn. So, but nevertheless, when we see Jesus, we are seeing Jah. There's no difference. He has all the authority of Jah, but he's just not the Father. He's not Jah in the direct, absolute sense. He has to be one who is Jah because he copies Jah. He follows what Jah does. He does everything Jah does. So even in a temporal sense, unless the Father does it first, the Son doesn't act. So everything the Son does is after the Father. Therefore, it does not matter to Christian witnesses of Jah whether we call Jesus God, Jah, Jehovah, the Son of God, Alpha and the Omega. He's all of those things because he's only doing what Jah wants him to do. He's not standing in his own authority apart from what he's been given as Jah and proclaiming himself as these things. He's only proclaiming himself as these things or being proclaimed as them, acknowledged as them, because Jah permits it. Jah allows him to stand in his place in that regard because he's been tested in every respect and proven faithful. It doesn't matter that he's not eternal. You do not have to be eternal in order to represent the eternal God according to what he says, according to what his word tells us. We don't need Trinitarians hundreds of years later telling us that you have to be an uncreated eternal being in order for these things to be true. That's not what we're taught. Okay? We accept what the Bible teaches, not what people hundreds of years later tell us the Bible teaches. The Bible's very plain. John 10, Jesus puts himself in the same category as these other sons of God. We accept what Jesus did there. We don't argue with Jesus when it comes to what kind of God he is. We already know. And we can call him Jah, Jehovah, or anything else because we know that's the only God he's showing us. So I wanted to make that explain that a little further. I talk about it in my other videos, but this is very important. And it's what's causing a lot of Trinitarians to fall flat on their face theologically, whereas they could be helping a lot of people. They're running around with all this metaphysical baggage and trying to dump it on people and see if they can figure it out. And if they don't accept this metaphysical concept that they've created that's not directly defined in the Bible, then they just brush you off. Just like the Watchtower, just like all these other cultic groups who, if you don't do what they say, then they reject you on behalf of Jesus and Jah. They don't have that authority. Reject their authority. Stay to the scriptures. Teach what the Bible teaches. And nothing these people say will matter. You're going to hear them this Saturday. You're going to see comments. It's what a lot of people live for. They live for arguing over the Trinity. They live for trying to tell people they haven't come to know Jesus yet. But they have. They're so enlightened. They're so illuminated that they can't even figure out John 10. That's how much the Holy Spirit has empowered them, that they can't even figure out what Jesus is talking about in John 10. They can't even figure out what he's doing quoting Psalm 82. That's how enlightened all these Trinitarians are. I don't see it. I don't see it at all. I'm not saying they're not knowledgeable or have some enlightenment, but they're not showing it. Certainly not when it comes to John 10 or any of these I am texts, or when it comes to 1 Timothy 3:16 and where it concerns who was manifest in the flesh. Anyway, I got a little excited there because, of course, when I talk about Jah and Jesus and those who try to tell us that we don't know them, when we're quoting the texts where they tell us who they are, I get a little excited because I think I know exactly who they are. And I think they're telling us exactly who they are. And I don't think it's a mystery at all. It's hard to understand in the ultimate metaphysical sense. That's why we give people an allowance and let them decide beyond the basic framework of our theology. But we're not trying to force people to accept a complex metaphysical view like the Trinity just so they can have an easier time understanding monotheism. That's not a problem in the Bible, and it's not a problem for us. It's a problem for those who accept gods other than Jah or spirit sons of God who stand on their own authority versus the authority they were given Jah. But that's not us. So I just wanted to make a few additional points in that regard we're kind of gearing up. Well, we will talk about that this Saturday, Benzie Roy. So again, you just have to ask yourself, what is Jesus talking about? When angels in the Hebrew scriptures are called Jehovah, Jah, and this is all over the place, even Exodus chapter 7, where Moses, or in Exodus where the angel appears to Moses in the burning bush and is talking, he's saying he's Jah, he's God. Well, in Acts, it says those are angels who were talking to Moses. So unless you understand that all good angels can and only do represent Jah, you won't be able to figure out these references. You won't be able to figure out how Jesus can be called God and yet also call someone else his God. Because there's only one God, the Father. When you refer to Jesus as God, you're talking to the Father. You should be. Because Jesus is talking to you as the Father. That's what he says over and over again. Thomas, how long have I been with you? These are his exact words, almost with this exacerbation, although I wasn't there. How long have I been with you? And you still don't know. You see how it can drive you a little crazy? It's been there the whole time. For some reason, we're just not comfortable accepting the fact that the sons of God who follow Jah can be and are called God and called Jah without compromising Jah's exclusive worship. Because that's the only reason they're there, is to promote Jah's exclusive worship. They're just an intermediary between him and everybody else. This is the repeated story over and over again. This is not like one time here and one time there. It's everywhere. I mean, Jesus could not speak more, I don't think, about how he's not doing anything of his own initiative. Nothing. Not a single thing, he says. We're not talking about eating and what he liked to eat. And we're talking about the things he was there to teach and do. These are his words. When he responds to the Jews in John 10, those are his words. I'm not adding anything to them. He's saying, why are you saying I'm blaspheming? Because I said I'm God's son. What work have I done? We're not accusing you of a fine work. You called yourself God's son. You're making yourself a god. Isn't it written that he called these sons of gods gods? Well, if he called those sons of gods gods, why can I not be called a god? I'm the son of God. It doesn't get any clearer. I can't make it any clearer. Anyone who doesn't read that account and understand it isn't going to get anything else. It will do you no good to go to any other text or try to convince them of something else if they don't accept Jesus' own words about who he is. Whether it's because he's there teaching you the will of the Father. The Father's working through him. That's what he said in John 14. It wasn't even him working. It's the Father working through him. That's why you can call Jesus Jah or God or even the Father, because he is. He's not being some independent being and telling you what he thinks while the Father's giving him messages on the side. It's just straight through to you, from the Father to you, through Jesus. So I wanted to get into that, but this is not an isolated thing. It's everywhere. It's from the accounts in Genesis having to do with the sons of God in Genesis chapter 6. It's in Judges, I believe chapter 13, where the angel ascends off the altar in a flame, and they say it's God we have seen. They even earlier called him Jehovah, and yet it very clearly is also referred to as an angel in that account. So if these other angels can be called those things, why is it, again, it's almost like we're repeating John 10. Why, if these angels in the Hebrew scriptures can be called Jehovah, Jah, why can't the Son of God, who is the exact representation of the Father's being, be called Jehovah, Jah, or God? He's not being called those things because he's part of a Trinity, just like the angels weren't part of a Trinity. He doesn't say that. He doesn't say, well, it's okay because I'm the person of God that is the Son. Nothing like that is taught in the Bible. We're taught about the gods and God. And we're taught about the gods who oppose Jah and the gods who emulate or represent Jah. None of them compromise his exclusive worship. They reinforce it by only being Jah wherever they are and in their will, teaching in person. And so while it may be a little difficult for us because we're far removed from those times, this is a very simple concept. This is not complex, and it's not something that's difficult to show in the Bible. It's everywhere. I mean, in numerous accounts. Let me just put it that way. I just get a little frustrated at times because people sometimes will act like this is somehow, they haven't read this before. I read it all the time. Almost everywhere I'm reading about angels or Jah, you're going to find something like this. And so it's not like the sons of God are some unknown concept to us. They're there all throughout the Bible and in texts that describe their relationship to Jah, whether it's Genesis 6, Psalm 82, Job 38, or John 10. Okay, the sons of God are well known, and Jesus is the firstborn of them. We don't even need to speculate on what firstborn means, right? Deuteronomy 21:17. It defines it for us. Jesus isn't appointed firstborn. He's not given the title that another created being has, and we just don't know who that firstborn really is. That makes no sense, given the priority to the firstborn, that is someone important. And so when they try to get away from these things, they have to get out from these texts that call Jesus firstborn, only begotten Son. None of those things can mean what they really mean for Trinitarians. They all have to be redefined. And then we don't really know who the firstborn is, and you end up with all these theological holes and contradictions. And well, we've all been there. We've all had these discussions, and yet they keep happening. So I suppose we'll just have to keep having them until the last day. Anyway, Saturday will be another day, and as you can see, I'm ready. I'm ready to talk about it because I think we shouldn't have to talk about it, if that makes any sense. So I'm going to do my best to talk about it so we don't have to talk about it, and we'll see what happens. But either way, I highly recommend that whatever you do, try to teach Jah. Teach Jesus according to texts like these. The things like the Trinity are traps. They're designed to get you off topic and on to metaphysical speculation and arguing about Jesus and Jah when you're supposed to be teaching others about them and the things that they need to know in order to worship them properly according to our understanding. You don't have to know everything, but we know enough. So teach what we know. Reject the other things that people are trying to get you to believe that are not consistent with what we can clearly read. And I think you'll have a much easier time talking to people about these subjects. Anyway, we went on a little bit longer today, and that's okay. So enjoy it. I will see you tomorrow. Tomorrow's Saturday, so we have our CW Jah Talk show number 7, and we will start that at 8:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Until then, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and may Jah bless you. Thank you.